Recently, two people, Drishtikone and Kafka's blue bug, or Prashant, talked about Israelis who visit India as tourists in a very dangerous reel that was like a dog whistle for jihadis to do what was done on Bondi Beach during Hanukkah. They told the viewers about how Israeli soldiers come to India to certain towns after their military stint and in which towns do they actually go to. It is quite obvious that Prashant is a trans or a queer individual who goes by the pronouns he, they. So let us discuss and view the entire battle between Israelis and Arab Muslims, specifically Palestinians, in clear and objective terms, and the moral fog that goes along with Indians and Hindus in particular around the world. Welcome to Vishleshan, our show on Drishtikone where we go beyond the noise, pierce through the propaganda, and expose the phenomena and actions that others are too afraid to touch or approach. This is not just about politics, you see, it's about rediscovering the truth. Today, we want to look at the situation in Palestine and Israel and the deep battle of narratives that far off people, specifically within the Indian and the Hindu community, engage in without full understanding or moral clarity. First, let's talk about the whole argument for the Palestinians' so-called resistance against what was once, they say, was their land. So lost land does not create an eternal right to violence. The claim that a people may legitimately wage perpetual violence because they once owned a territory but lost it in a war collapses under any consistent global norm. Why this argument really fails universally is if historical possession followed by military defeat were sufficient justification for armed resistance, then Greeks could wage a war across Anatolia. Germans would attack Poland and Czech Republic. The native tribes across the world would be in permanent state of insurgency. And most starkly, the partition refugees would have an open license for terror. Take the case of Lahore. My family, for example, was uprooted and thrown out of our ancestral lands that we lived for generations. Similarly, millions of Hindus and Sikhs were violently expelled in 1947, what is now Pakistan. Property was seized, families were erased, and yet no global forum would recognize bombing of civilians in Pakistan as a legitimate resistance by those Hindus and Sikhs. And nor should it be. International norms, however imperfect, draw a very clear line. War ends with treaties or an armistice. Borders stabilize once, and that's how they should be. Civilians targeting becomes illegitimate after that. The moment you legitimize ancestral grievance as a casus belli, the entire post-1945 international order will disintegrate. Then why is this standard selectively suspended for Israel? In the case of Israel, however, the rule is reversed. War initiated to destroy it is reframed as responses. Defeat does not terminate the claims of those Arab Muslims, and time does not dilute any grievance that they have. That clearly is political exceptionalism, driven by ideology, without any legitimate principle backing it up. So granting the right to resistance to Palestinians from the river to the sea is an illegitimate claim. Now we also want to address the Hamas versus Palestinian artificial differentiation. Is hatred limited only to the Hamas? Or is it a socially distributed within the entire Palestinian population? This is the harder and the more uncomfortable question that we need to ask. But it must be addressed objectively and without euphemism. The core issue here is participation in hate and terror versus authorship of hate and terror. It is very accurate to say that Hamas planned and executed mass atrocities. Hamas is an Islamist organization with explicit genocidal language But it would be inaccurate to claim that hatred exists only at the level of Hamas leadership. There are clear indicators of broader socialization of the Palestinian population into hatred. Across decades, multiple independent sources, including NGOs, UN linked monitoring groups, and Arab media translations, have documented cases of educational indoctrination. School books portray Jews as cosmic enemies. Maps are used where Israel is entirely erased. Martyrdom is presented as an aspirational future for the kids. Social reinforcement is rampant. Militant acts are celebrated as family honor. Killings are framed as religious achievement. And public praise for violence is extremely common. There is civilian normalization as well. Civilian participation in humiliation rituals is very common. You remember Shani Luke? She was an Israeli who was killed on October 7th, and her body was thrown into a lorry, and we saw Hamas men dragging her half naked in this lorry around Palestinian territory. And the common people, they were spitting on her, shouting Allahu Akbar. Absence of moral taboo around desecration of Jewish dead is seen very commonly. Language that erases the civilian combatant distinction with respect to the Jews is also very common. This does not mean that 100% of Palestinians are violent or 100% of civilians endorse atrocities, but it does mean something crucial, that hatred is not an isolated militia pathology. It is a socially transmitted, morally normalized, and institutionally reinforced phenomenon across Palestinian population. Why do the Hamas is not equal to Palestinians slogans sound rhetorical and incorrect? The slogan is morally comforting, but analytically very, very weak. A more accurate formulation, however, would be Hamas is an armed vanguard of an ideology that has been normalized far beyond its ranks. That distinction really matters because removing Hamas alone does not remove the anti Jewish and terror worldview. Ceasefires do not neutralize indoctrination, and reconstruction without de radicalization will reset the cycle all over again. This is why comparisons with nationalist insurgencies in other places would fail. The Irish Republican movement did not teach their children that Protestants were subhuman. Even the anti colonial struggles did not sacralize the killing of civilians as a religious duty. We now have an uncomfortable conclusion. Two propositions can be true at once. One, civilian suffering is tragic and morally serious. And two, a society that raises children on annihilationist narratives cannot be treated as a passive bystander to the violence they commit. Recognizing this is not collective punishment. What Palestine needs is collective responsibilities. The same principle applied to post-war Germany, Imperial Japan, or Rwanda. And why this matters for Srishti and Prashant, type of so-called liberal and explicitly disavowed Hindus, is because Hindus, particularly those shaped by the post-partition memory, should understand this very clearly, that trauma does not license terror, and loss does not sanctify murder, and civilizations survive only when grievance is subordinated to coexistence. Those who romanticize religious violence abroad while demanding pluralism at home are not being compassionate. They are being civilizationally illiterate. Now, let us go to the most important point. Why is the explicit religious undertaking of one group, complete with the mission statement and articulation, given acceptance? Would it be allowed if the roles were reversed? Let us discuss the Six-Day War, which was fought in 1965, that the Arab Islamic nations waged against Israel. Was the Arab objective in 1967 genocidal? Yes, absolutely, by their own words. Before the Six Day War, the Arab leaders were very explicit. Nasser of Egypt said that our basic objective will be destruction of Israel. Ahmed Shukeri of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, said those Jews who survive will be helped to leave. That is not territorial dispute. That was a clear and explicit intent to eliminate a people and their state. If Israel had ever articulated its war aims in equivalent language, say like exterminate all the Muslims or erase all the Arabs, I'm sure the global reaction would have been instantaneous and very strong outrage. That asymmetry is not accidental. It lives on our moral complicity of passive yet genocidal anti Semitism. So, why does Israel get condemned for survival wars while genocidal intent is minimized? Because language, optics, and moral framing matter more in the global discourse than intent or history. The asymmetry works like this: Islamist movements frame violence as resistance, Israel frames violence as security. That's the basic difference. Western progressives articulate it in terms of privilege, the perceived underdog, the decolonial narrative, the emotional imagery over the historical causality. So when Hamas embeds itself inside the civilians and provokes the war, the body count optics actually dominates. While the stated genocidal ideology of Hamas of using civilians as a shield in their war strategy, well, that fades into the background. And this is how Hamas wins the narrative, even while openly calling for Jewish extermination in its founding charter and the later texts. So, why do some Hindus, especially the LGBTQ Hindus, side with the Palestinians anyway? Not because they're stupid, but because they are operating under three powerful illusions. Illusion one, identity stacking. They see themselves first as LGBTQ or progressive or anti colonial, not as a Hindu or civilizational minority. So they instinctively side with whoever the Western left defines as oppressed, even if that group would criminalize or execute them if they showed up in their societies, say like Gaza or Lahore. And illusion two, selective universalism. They believe that human rights apply everywhere equally. In theory, that is a very noble aspiration. In practice, it is utterly and stupidly false. In Islamist societies, LGBTQ identity is equal to a crime. Apostasy is equal to death. And blasphemy? Well, that invites lynching and death. They project Western liberal norms onto societies that explicitly reject them. These so called liberals get to say what they do because of the freedoms they have in the society they abuse itself, while those societies they fight for would execute them for merely existing. So when someone like Prashant or Srishti talks about persecution in India, they are not just diabolical, but they are naively suicidal. And that is how we come to the illusion three, moral narcissism. Supporting Palestine becomes a virtue signal. I am very compassionate, enlightened, and anti war. It's about how they feel. That has absolutely no relationship to what actually happens after the Islamist victory in that very society. There would be no he, him, she, her, they, them left to feel anything. Ask the Iranians or the Afghans or of Pakistanis. So, are they suicidal? Well, not consciously, but they are strategically naive. Most do not believe that Islamism would ever turn on them. Well, the history says otherwise. In Iran, the leftists who backed the revolution, Well, they were summarily executed after that. In Gaza, LGBTQ Palestinians seek asylum outside. Most ironically, flee to Israel. In Afghanistan, the progressive allies were erased overnight after the Taliban came over. In Bangladesh, all the so called progressive Hindus who backed Yunus were either humiliated, raped, or killed. This is documented reality, not some hypothetical argument. So, how do you actually change such Hindus? Well, don't start with Israel. That's where the debate actually goes to die. Step one, make it personal, not geopolitical. Ask calmly, would you feel safe openly being gay in Gaza? What law protects you there? And who enforces that law? Let the silence do the work. And step two, separate people from their ideology. Say this explicitly. Caring about Palestinian civilians does not require endorsing Islamist movements that deny your own right to exist. Force them to confront the false binary they have adopted themselves. And step three, introduce a symmetry that is really required. Ask, if Israel declared a religious war to exterminate all the Muslims, would you defend it as resistance? Obviously, they'll say a resounding no. So then ask, so why is the reverse treated very differently? Now the contradiction is in their mind, not yours. Now let's come to step four. Re-anchor them in Hindu civilizational memory. Without aggression, we need to share that Hindus know what religious conquest really looks like. Hindus know what happens when minority rights depend on majority mercy. And LGBTQ people are never safe in such theocracies. After all, Section 377 that criminalized homosexuality was mirrored on British law of 1861, which was itself rooted in the older English ecclesiastical or church laws of the Buggery Act of 1533. It was during a Hindu majority party BJP that this law was actually scrapped, because in Hindu social laws, homosexuality is not a sin. This is not about Jews versus Muslims or Hindu versus Muslims. It is about pluralism versus absolutism. Now let's come to the hard truth. Many of these individuals are really not looking for truth. They are looking for belonging to the Western progressive tribes. You can't save everyone, you see, but you can expose their contradictions, refuse moral blackmail based on false binaries and articulation based on moral fog, and speak calmly, historically, and personally. That's how minds change, slowly, unevenly, but genuinely. So we need to go out and confront these people who have built their whole universe on false binaries. So tell us in the comments, if a movement openly declares that people like you should not exist and educates its children to believe the same, on what moral basis do you call its violence resistance and not supremacism? Please do comment below. And until next time, Jai Hind.